The moment I walked into the ballroom of the Sterling Grand, I heard it. Alexis, my brother's perfect fiancée, leaned toward her bridesmaids, swirling a glass of champagne. Her whisper was loud enough to cut through the music, and I know she meant for me to hear it. Oh, great. The corn-fed trash finally showed up. I didn't flinch. I didn't look down at my boots. I just kept walking. What Alexis didn't know, what nobody in this room knew, was that I wasn't just a guest. I was the CEO of Apex Stays. I owned the crystal chandeliers above her head. I owned the marble beneath her heels. And by midnight, I would own the secret that was about to turn her perfect engagement party into a crime scene. Be honest, have you ever had someone look down on you, having no idea that you were actually the most powerful person in the room? Drop a yes in the comments, and tell me where you are watching from tonight. I stood near a towering ice sculpture of a swan, watching the room with the detached precision of an auditor. The Sterling Grand Ballroom was a masterpiece of excess. Imported white orchids cascaded from the ceiling. Silk tablecloths shimmered under the light of $50,000 chandeliers. It was beautiful, it was expensive, and every single invoice had crossed my desk 3 months ago. I looked down at my own reflection in the polished glass. Jeans, scuffed leather boots. A flannel shirt tucked in with deliberate carelessness. I wasn't dressed like this because I couldn't afford better. My usual attire was tailored Italian wool and heels that cost more than my parents' car. No, this was a costume. I was playing a role tonight, the struggling sister. The failure. The corn-fed girl who couldn't make it in the big city. I wanted to see if they would look past the denim to see me. They didn't. My brother, Tyler, spotted me from across the room. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him perfectly, holding court with a group of investment bankers. He gave me a tight, pitying smile, the kind you give a stray dog you don't intend to feed. The golden boy. The insurance agent who walked like a king because he'd never had to build his own kingdom. I remembered the day that dynamic was cemented. I was 18. Holding an acceptance letter to a top business program. My parents sat me down at our scratched kitchen table in Illinois. They didn't have the money for my tuition, they said. Times were tough. The farm was struggling. I understood. I was ready to take loans. But 2 days later, a brand new BMW rolled into the driveway. It was for Tyler. A graduation gift. They had liquidated my college fund not to save the farm, but to buy my brother a status symbol. They sent me into the world with $58 and a pat on the back. That memory used to burn like acid. Now, it was just data, a baseline for their character. But looking at Tyler now, raising a glass of champagne I had paid for, I felt the old urge surfacing. The urge that had cost me $210,000 over the last 5 years. I hadn't just walked away. I had become their silent investor. Every month, for 60 months, I had sent a cashier's check for $3,500 to my parents' address. No name, no return address, just cash. Why did I do it? For a long time, I told myself it was charity. I told myself I was being the bigger person. But standing here, watching my mother fawn over Alexis's diamond ring, I admitted the truth. It wasn't kindness. It was a transaction. I was paying a subscription fee for a family that didn't want me. I was trying to buy my way out of the failure box they had put me in. I wanted to prove, privately, that I was the one keeping the lights on. It was the invisible chain of the survivor, the desperate need to save the people who threw you overboard, just to prove you could swim. But tonight, the subscription was cancelled. The air in the ballroom was becoming toxic. It wasn't just the cloying scent of lilies, or the humidity of 300 bodies, it was the suffocating weight of pretense. I needed oxygen. I slipped through a side door into a service corridor. A quiet stretch of carpet and beige wallpaper that led to the executive suites. It was the kind of hallway designed to be invisible, the arteries of the hotel where the real work happened, and that was where I found him. Robert, the father of the bride, was pacing near the emergency exit. He had shed his jacket, his tie was loosened, and the jovial, red-faced patriarch I had seen holding court at the bar was gone. In his place was a man sweating through his starch-stiffened shirt. He was pressing his phone so hard against his ear his knuckles were white. I stopped. I didn't hide. I just stood still. letting the shadows of the alcove swallow me. Silence is a weapon, and I know how to wield it. I told you the timeline, Robert hissed into the phone. His voice was a jagged whisper, vibrating with panic. We need 30 days. Just give us 30 days. He paused, listening to someone who was clearly not interested in negotiation. No, listen to me, Robert snapped. The merger is happening tonight. The kid is on board. He has the land, 500 acres in Illinois, prime agricultural zoning. We leverage that, we liquidate, and I wire you the $12 million by the first of the month. $12 million. My blood went cold. This wasn't about wedding costs, or a struggling business. $12 million was life or death money. That was bury you in the desert money. Yes, the deed is in his name, Robert lied, his voice cracking. We get the signature on the marriage license, we get access to the assets. Just hold off the auditors. If you file the lien now, everything collapses. He hung up and leaned his forehead against the cool plaster of the wall, taking a shuddering breath. I stepped back, my heels silent on the plush carpet. The puzzle pieces didn't just click together. They slammed into place with the force of a gavel. The Carringtons weren't wealthy socialites. They were predators. They were drowning, and they had identified my brother as their life raft. But the tragedy was the error in their calculation. They were hunting a ghost. My mother. It had to be her. In her desperation to sell Tyler as a prize catch, she must have spun a fantasy about the family farm. She must have told them he owned the 500 acres we grew up on. She painted him as a land baron, to secure a trophy wife. But that land didn't belong to Tyler. It had been sold off parcel by parcel years ago, to pay for his mistakes, his cars, his lifestyle. There was no land. There was no asset. Robert and Alexis were walking into a trap of their own making, expecting a golden parachute, but they were about to jump out of a plane with a backpack full of rocks. They were going to destroy my brother. They would marry him, realize he was penniless, and then discard him, leaving him with the wreckage of their debt. Or worse, they would convince him to sign loans he couldn't repay, dragging him into prison alongside them. I could have walked away. I could have let the sharks eat the golden child. It would have been poetic justice, but looking at Robert's desperate, sweating back, I realized something. This wasn't a family drama anymore. It was a hostile takeover attempt on my bloodline. I turned around and walked back toward the lobby. I didn't go to the ballroom. I went to the elevator. I needed a quiet room, a secure connection, and my team. It was time to audit the books. I walked into the executive suite and locked the heavy oak door. This wasn't a party anymore. It was a war room. I sat behind my desk, the glass surface cool under my palms, and pulled out my phone. I didn't call the police. Not yet. I called my CFO, David. He answered on the first ring, professional and alert despite the late hour. Megan. Is there a problem at the venue? Not with the venue, I said, my voice calm. The kind of calm that comes right before you fire an entire department. I need a full financial autopsy on the Carrington family. Robert and Alexis, specifically, look for distressed debt, liens, and shell companies. I need everything you can find in the next 15 minutes. Understood, we're on it. While I waited, I opened my laptop and accessed the hotel's security feed. I watched the ballroom from a god's eye view. My mother, Susan, was hovering around Alexis, laughing too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. She was trying so hard to belong, to cement her place in this fake dynasty. She looked desperate. And Tyler, he was just standing there, smiling vacantly, the perfect prop in a play he didn't know was a tragedy. My phone pinged. The dossier from legal had arrived. I opened the file, and the numbers flooded my screen. It was worse than I thought. It wasn't just debt. It was a lifestyle funded by a Ponzi scheme of credit. The Carringtons were leveraged pretenders. Asset poor, lifestyle rich. It's a common disease in high society. People see the cars, the clothes, the vacations, and they assume wealth. But wealth is net worth. What the Carringtons had was cash flow issues masked by rotating credit lines. They lived on the float, using a new loan to pay the interest on an old one, creating the illusion of solvency while drowning in red ink. When the music stopped, they wouldn't just be broke, they would be negative. And the music had stopped 3 months ago. I scrolled down. Their primary lender, a mid-tier bank in Chicago, had bundled their debt as distressed assets, $12 million of toxic loans, currently up for sale to anyone willing to buy the risk for pennies on the dollar. I stared at the screen. A slow smile spread across my face. They were trying to liquidate my brother to pay off a bank. But what if the bank wasn't a bank anymore? What if the bank was me? I texted David back. The Chicago debt bundle, buy it. Authorize the transfer from the acquisition fund. Now. Megan, David replied instantly. That's a high-risk purchase. The collateral is shaky. The collateral is their freedom, I typed. Buy it. 3 minutes later, a confirmation flashed on my screen. Transaction complete. Apex Stays is now the primary lien holder. I closed my laptop. The power shifted in the room, even if no one downstairs felt it yet. I wasn't just the sister they mocked. I wasn't just the CEO they didn't know about. I was their creditor. I owned their cars, their house, their clothes, and as of 9:42 p.m., I owned their future. I stood up, smoothed my flannel shirt, and checked my reflection. The corn-fed trash was ready to collect. I walked back to the elevator. The doors slid open with a soft chime, and I stepped in, descending toward the ballroom like a guillotine blade. It was time for the toasts. The ballroom had reached a fever pitch of enforced joy. The champagne had flowed long enough to make everyone loose and loud. Alexis was on the dance floor, twirling in her designer gown, laughing with the careless abandon of someone who believes the bill will never come due. I moved to the back of the room, near the AV booth. The technician, a young guy named Leo who I'd hired fresh out of college, caught my eye. He looked nervous. He knew what was on the flash drive I'd given him earlier. I gave him a small, imperceptible nod. Be ready. Robert tapped a spoon against his glass, the sharp clink, clink, clink silencing the crowd. He stepped onto the small stage, microphone in hand, beaming with the expansive, sweaty confidence of a man who thinks he's just pulled off the heist of the century. Family and friends, Robert boomed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. Tonight isn't just about love. It's about legacy. It's about the merging of two great families. He gestured grandly toward my parents, who were sitting at the head table, looking stunned and grateful to be included in such elite company. My mother dabbed at her eyes, overwhelmed by the validation she had craved her entire life. When Alexis brought Tyler home, Robert continued, placing a heavy hand on my brother's shoulder. I knew he was special, a man of substance, a man with roots. Tyler smiled, but it was weak. He looked confused. He didn't know about the roots Robert was talking about. He didn't know about the farm. He just knew he was marrying a beautiful woman who made him feel important. And tonight, Robert announced, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that filled the room. I am proud to announce that Tyler has agreed to make a significant investment in our shared future. He has generously agreed to leverage the family's historic acreage to ensure that our children, and our children's children, will never know want. The room erupted in polite applause. But Tyler froze. He stared at Robert, then at my mother. I saw his lips move. What acreage? My mother looked away, her face flushing. She knew. She had planted the lie. And now it was blooming into a trap she couldn't control. Robert raised his glass. To Tyler. To the land. To the future. To the future! The crowd echoed. I pulled out my phone and texted Leo. Now. The giant LED screens behind the stage flickered. The slideshow of Alexis and Tyler's perfectly curated engagement photos, the beach walks, the ski trips, the fake laughter vanished. The screen went black for a second. Then, a document appeared. It was crisp, high definition, and undeniable. A notice of default and intent to foreclose, dated 3 weeks ago, addressed to Robert Carrington. The amount owed, $12 million. The applause died instantly. A murmur of confusion rippled through the room. What is this? Alexis hissed, turning to the AV booth. Turn it off. But the screen changed again. This time, it was a debt acquisition form. Time-stamped 9:42 p.m. tonight. It showed the transfer of the entire distressed debt bundle from the Chicago bank to a new holder. Apex Stays. Incorporated. And then, the final slide. A mugshot. It was grainy, from a few years ago in Florida, but the face was unmistakable. Robert Carrington, holding a placard with a booking number for wire fraud. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens when a bomb goes off but the sound hasn't hit you yet. I stepped out of the shadows. My boots clicked loudly on the marble floor as I walked toward the stage. "Get that trash out of here!" Alexis shrieked, pointing at the screen, her face contorted with rage. She looked at me, her eyes wild. You did this. Get out. You don't belong here." I walked up the stairs to the stage. I didn't grab the mic from Robert. I took it from the stand, calm and steady. "You're right, Alexis," I said, my voice amplified, clear and cold. "Trash should leave." I looked at Robert, who was staring at the screen like he'd seen a ghost. Then I looked at my brother, who was white as a sheet. "But since I own the building," I said, gesturing to the ballroom around us. "And as of 10 minutes ago, I own your debt. I think I'll stay." The gasp that went through the room was physical. It sucked the air out of the space. I turned to my mother. "You wanted a wealthy child, Mom? You wanted someone to save the family? Well, you got one. It just wasn't the son you bought a BMW for. It was the daughter you left with $58. I looked back at the crowd. "The bar is closed," I announced. "And I believe the authorities are waiting at the front entrance to discuss the terms of your surrender." The doors to the ballroom didn't just open, they were breached. A team of federal agents moved through the crowd with the kind of synchronized efficiency that makes you realize the party is definitely over. I had tipped them off 3 hours ago, sending the digital paper trail of the Carringtons' wire fraud directly to the local field office. I watched from the stage as Robert was handcuffed. He didn't fight, he just slumped. A man whose house of cards had finally succumbed to gravity. Alexis was screaming, blaming her father, blaming me, blaming everyone but the person in the mirror. They were led out the service entrance, leaving behind a room full of melting ice sculptures and stunned silence. Then came the part I had dreaded, yet craved. My parents, my mother, Susan, walked up to the edge of the stage. She looked at me with wide, wet eyes. She didn't look angry, she looked calculating. She was already rewriting history in her head, pivoting to the winner. "Megan," she said, her voice trembling with a performance of pride. "I knew it. I always told your father you were the smart one. We knew you were special." I didn't laugh, I didn't scream, I just pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. I walked down the stairs and held the screen in front of her face. "Look at the history, Mom," I said. $3,500, every month, for 5 years, $210,000. She stared at the numbers, her face pale. "You thought it was Tyler," I said, my voice low and flat. "You bragged to the neighbors that your golden boy was taking care of you, but it wasn't him, it was the corn-fed failure. I kept the lights on. I paid for the groceries. I bought the very clothes you are wearing right now." Tyler stood behind her, unable to meet my eyes. He knew he hadn't sent a dime. He had let them believe the lie because it felt good. "The account is closed," I said. "The subscription is cancelled. Do not call me when the power goes out." I turned my back on them and walked out of the hotel. I didn't look back. There was no need. The bridge wasn't just burned. I had demolished the foundation. 1 month later, I sat in my office on the 42nd floor of the Apex Tower. The morning sun hit the glass, turning the room into gold. On my desk sat a check. It was the proceeds from the liquidation of the Carringtons' remaining assets, the few things the bank hadn't seized. It was a significant sum. I could have kept it, I could have bought a boat or a vacation home. But that felt petty. I wanted this victory to grow roots. I picked up my pen and signed the paperwork for the Steel and Soil Scholarship. It was a full-ride endowment for girls from rural farming communities, girls who had been told they were too country for the boardroom, too corn-fed for tech. I was going to pay for their tuition, their housing, and their startup capital. I was taking the money from people who used debt to fake status, and giving it to people who had nothing but grit. That is the justice of the sower. You take the rot, you compost it, and you use it to grow something that can't be cut down. I walked to the window and looked out at the Boston skyline. I didn't need my parents to tell me I did good. I didn't need a seat at their table. I had built my own building. Sometimes you have to stop trying to sit at a table where you aren't respected and build your own damn building. If you're building your own empire in silence, type building in the comments. I'm rooting for you.